Good evening. Welcome to the Lincoln Land Conservation Trust annual meeting. I'm Jeff McGeehan, the Executive Director, and it's wonderful to have so many of you here this evening, even if it's virtually. We wish we were seeing you all in person and enjoying everyone's company, but we hopefully will get back to our regular annual meeting routine next year. Of course, I think I've now been saying that for the last few years. So tonight, we have three parts to our annual meeting. Part one will be a brief business meeting that will include the election of our trustees. Then the Land Trust staff will provide a quick summary of some of our activities over the last year plus. And then finally, we're excited to welcome our guest speaker, Avalon Owens, who is an expert firefly researcher, and she'll be sharing some of her research data, including from our own Lincoln conservation fields. And she'll talk to us about light pollution and the impact that has on certain firefly species. As Bryn will mention later, light pollution is a topic of great interest to the Land Trust, and we hope to continue some townwide educational outreach over the coming year. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Avalon tonight. We apologize that we have to mute you this evening, but with so many of you joining us, we think that will work best. If you have any questions or comments anytime during the evening, please feel free to type the question into the chat box, and we'll try to respond accordingly. So before we move to the election of trustees, I just want to thank everyone who supports the Land Trust and also encourage you to get involved. A great part of the success of the Land Trust through the years is thanks to the dedication of its members and supporters. There are many ways you can help support our work, and we'll touch on a few of those throughout the evening. Of course, number one is membership, as we cannot do our conservation work without your generosity. The financial support provided by your membership helps fund the vast majority of LLCT's annual operating budget. So again, to all our members, thank you. In the next couple of months, you'll be receiving a membership reminder for 2023 via email and/or snail mail. And we hope you'll consider supporting the Land Trust again this coming year. So I just wanted us all to take a minute to appreciate this. This is to remind us how beautiful Lincoln really is. And the reason it looks this way is because of your support for conservation through the years. I also want to take a minute and thank all the amazing photographers who submit photos to us throughout the year, and more specifically for the Open Spaces calendar. Bryn will highlight the calendar a little later, but hopefully you saw a few of those photos on the slideshow when you first logged on this evening. We have so many special places in Lincoln and incredible biodiversity, given how close we are to a big city. Just for reference, this is a beautiful slide from Alex McLean, who many of you know, a famous Lincoln aerial photographer. So I do want to mention another way you can support the Land Trust, actually coming right up next month, is through the Scarecrow Classic. This will be the 10th anniversary of this fun community event. So if you're a runner or walker, I hope you can join us on Sunday morning, October 16th. You can find more information in the link to the registration on our website, lincolnconservation.org. And I want to thank all those who have supported the event by running, walking, or volunteering, and particularly want to thank our very loyal business sponsors through the years. So again, put the 16th on your calendar. I say this every year, but the weather is always glorious. And so far, we're 9 for 9 with me saying that. So hopefully I have not jinxed the streak. I should also mention that we have a 10th anniversary gift, a complimentary Scarecrow runner's hat you'll receive with your registration, in addition to our famous Scarecrow shirts. So please register early if you'd like a hat and shirt before supplies run out. Okay, business meeting time. As I mentioned, your support through membership is critical to the Land Trust's success during the year. One of the tasks that our membership is asked to perform is the election of our trustees. Our nominating committee has put forth 5 existing trustees this year who are seeking election for another 3-year term to the LLCT board. All of these trustees are currently serving and their terms are expiring. And if they're on this call and want to give a Zoom hand raise, they can identify themselves. Michelle Barnes, South Great Road, our chair. Bob Mason, Old Concord Road. Ellen Metters, Beaver Pond Road, our treasurer. Paul Shorb, South Great Road. And Nancy Soulette on Woods End Road, our secretary. So I'd like to request a motion from our membership. We're kind of doing this electronically, to accept the proposed slate of 5 trustees. And can someone please send a simple motion to approve the slate through the chat function? Just type in approve the slate. Great. And could I have a second on that? Thank you very much. And if you are a member, you can now give a Zoom clap or thumbs up if you approve the slate. And any thumbs down? I hope not. Great. Okay, I think the motion passes and the 5 trustees will serve 3-year terms expiring in 2025. All right. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the other LLCT trustees who serve the board so well and whose terms are not up this year. Again, Bryn, if you want to go to full screen, now that you've just come back to this screen, they can do a Zoom hands up if they're on the call. Andy Nazo, our vice treasurer from Sandy Pond Road. Ken Bassett on Page Road. Dan England on Weston Road. Jim Henderson on Giles Road. Susan Welsh on Beaver Pond Road. Andy Stevenson on Page Road. Susan Allen, Weston Road, our vice chair. Buzz Constable, Old Lexington Road, LLCT's president. Andy Fallander on Page Road. Tony Howland, also on Page Road. Win Loud on Conant Road. And Diana Jong on Giles Road. So I should mention that all of the trustees also serve on the Rural Land Foundation board, so they have double duty with LLCT and RLF. So please thank them with a Zoom clap for all their efforts in helping to conserve and steward the fields, woods, and trails for us all to enjoy. All right. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the staff, our very dedicated staff. Bryn Gingrich, our outreach director. Sarah Lupkus, our stewardship director. And Jane Layton, our stewardship coordinator. Despite only working part-time, they do so much for the Land Trust with such a strong conservation commitment, incredible talent, and a wonderful attitude. The Land Trust is really fortunate to have them as part of the organization. So thank you to Bryn, Sarah, and Jane. And a special thanks to Jane, as it's with mixed emotions but profound appreciation that I have to announce Jane will be retiring from the Land Trust at the end of October. I've worked with Jane now for 30 years from my early days at the Conservation Commission, when Jane was the town's conservation ranger, to her most recent years with the Land Trust as our stewardship coordinator. There's no one more dedicated to caring for Lincoln's conservation land and wildlife than Jane. Her knowledge of our conservation land is truly remarkable. From my viewpoint, no one works harder in the field than Jane, and I'm not just saying that. Many a young, strong intern under Jane's direction have learned what it's really like to put in a hard day's work in the heat, among the ticks, the poison ivy, the invasive species, and many of nature's little summertime joys. Jane puts them literally in the ground. I do want to mention that one of Jane's many talents is her ability to fix or jerry-rig or find some way to make things work. She's incredibly resourceful, kind of the female equivalent of MacGyver, for those of you who know that reference. Give her a few tools and she can solve almost any problem in the field. So we'll truly miss Jane, but she's not going far, and you know we will find a way to keep her active in Lincoln conservation. She probably doesn't want me to do this, but now she'll have more time to carve her amazing birds. If you're not aware of her incredible talent, please visit her website, as they are truly spectacular. And then this is just a reminder that if you're an invasive plant species out there, don't think you're going to have a carefree life to spread and cause ecological damage. Jane will still be around to hunt you down, remove you, and dispose of you properly. So again, thank you, Jane. I also want to introduce Joe Miller, who will be taking over for Jane as our new stewardship coordinator. Joe has interned for us and the town for the last 2 summers, and he has somehow survived. He is a talented and hardworking guy who recently graduated from Brandeis, and we're really excited to welcome Joe to our land trust team. And Joe, if you're on the call, do you want to raise your hand so people can see you? There he is. Thank you, Joe. All right. I would be remiss not to give a quick shout out to the Education Committee, consisting of Gwyn Loud, Selena Rossiter, Heather Ring, and Michelle Barnes, who helped coordinate our annual meeting and are responsible, working with Bryn, for all the wonderful education and outreach programs that the Land Trust offers throughout the year. I should mention that Selena has stepped down from the committee, but we greatly appreciate all her service through the years, both on the Education Committee and also as a trustee. So thank you, Selena. So before we introduce our guest speaker, we want to provide a brief summary of some of LLCT's activities over the last year. In a minute, Sarah will talk about our important stewardship work, and Bryn will summarize some of our education and outreach efforts. But I want to start by talking about land acquisition. Lincoln looks the way it does today, with beautiful fields, forests, wetlands, and trails, because of the generosity of so many who have contributed to our land conservation efforts throughout the years. Your support for land acquisition is critical, and of course, at the local level, is one of the most important ways that we can combat climate change. Lincoln was one of the first towns in Massachusetts to realize the importance of preserving open space, with the first private conservation restriction signed almost 60 years ago along Fairhaven Bay. Our commitment to preserving our landscape, our agricultural heritage, and our incredible biodiversity on our lands has not wavered through the years. Just in the past 20 years, over 900 acres of additional land has been permanently protected. I wanted to highlight just one of our recent conservation acquisitions off of Twin Pond Lane. We worked with the Salon Birchby family to preserve an additional 8 acres of forested upland and wetlands near the Twin Pond Stony Brook conservation area of town. For those of you not familiar with the land, it's located off of Twin Pond Lane and Tower Road, as you can see here on the map. It's adjacent to Twin Pond in the Stony Brook conservation area, and you can also see Beaver Pond conservation land to the north. A key part of this conservation deal was the permanent preservation of a critical trail in from Twin Pond Lane that connects to the Twin Pond, Stony Brook, and Beaver Pond conservation lands. As with many of our conservation parcels in Lincoln, both small and large, the diversity of wildlife is impressive. Perhaps even more importantly, the land serves as part of a much larger wildlife corridor stretching in all directions. I do want to point out that a few of the neighbors have actually seen a fisher on this property. That's the animal in the middle of your screen there. And as you may know, fishers tend to like deep woodland habitat with lots of contiguous forest. So it's pretty impressive that we have the necessary habitat for them here in Lincoln. The Twin Pond land also provided important protection for the city of Cambridge water supply. Similar to some of the adjacent conservation properties, a portion of the land is tributary to Stony Brook and is classified as Zone A, which is the highest level of importance for Cambridge watershed protection. So as with some of our other recent conservation projects in town, Cambridge was an important partner for this particular acquisition. Speaking of partners, they're always critical to our success. Here's a list of those partners that made the Twin Pond project possible. A special thanks to the 40+ neighbors and friends of conservation who contributed to this project. And of course, to the Salon Birchby family, who were very generous in partnering with us towards a conservation solution that worked for everyone. So again, thank you to all those who participated, and we hope you'll continue to support land conservation efforts in Lincoln. So unless there are any specific questions so far, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Bryn to talk about our important stewardship and outreach work.
Thank you, Jeff. As mentioned previously, a core part of LLCT's mission is conservation land acquisition. Whether that land is directly transferred or donated to LLCT, or if a conservation restriction is donated, LLCT is required to monitor the land annually to ensure that the restrictions placed upon the parcel aren't violated. One of the best ways to prevent some of the worst impacts of climate change, including severe storms and changing weather patterns, is to maintain as much natural habitat as possible. Stormwater runoff is a serious issue that impacts water quality and safety in general, and even the integrity of our septic systems and building foundations. Keeping as much of our land in an undeveloped state as possible allows rainwater to percolate into the ground and recharge our aquifers, instead of running off into our storm drains where the water picks up roadway chemicals that impact aquatic life and water quality. As part of our monitoring responsibilities, we monitor over 150 private conservation restrictions and deeded lands. We also serve as a resource for landowners who may have questions regarding the impacts of activity on their land or best practices for removing invasive plant species and encouraging native flora and fauna on their properties. The more we can all work together to steward the land in Lincoln, the greater of an impact we can have against climate change and its negative effects on the landscape. We also collaborate closely with the Town of Lincoln's Conservation Director, Michelle Grisenda, and Conservation Planner, Stacy Carter, who help with the follow-up of wetlands permitting and violations. In addition to monitoring, land management is a core mission of the LLCT stewardship team. We aim to have a light touch and allow ecosystems to flourish without intensive management. However, we do try our best to control the invasive species found in our conservation areas, which can feel like an uphill battle much of the time. Invasive species can negatively affect ecosystem resiliency and biodiversity. And in this era of climate change, many invasive species benefit from the warming temperatures and can shade out native plants and monopolize water in the soil. In addition, some of these plants, such as garlic mustard and Norway maples, are allelopathic, which means they emit chemicals into the soil that prevent other plants from germinating and growing. Other land management projects that we undertook in 2021 include a restoration project in Chapman Pasture. In the photo on the top left, Jane and I were collecting and removing the debris from decades of barbed wire fencing in Chapman, so that the edges could be mowed and invasive plants cut back. We also spend time clearing trails from encroaching vegetation. In the top right photo, Joe and Adrian, our 2021 summer interns, were helping to build the information kiosk at Mount Misery. In the bottom left photo, Joe and Jane are removing water chestnut from Beaver Pond. And finally, in the bottom right photo, you can see one of our most enthusiastic volunteers, Peter Van Mertens, who has helped us with quite a few boardwalk building projects over the past few years. Here he corralled a few friends to help build a bog bridge in Silver Hill Bog. And I want to highlight his help because he manages to get groups together even in the coldest months of the year. Thank you, Peter. We coordinate with the town's conservation department a great deal when we host volunteer workdays. You've probably seen Ryan Brown, the town's land manager, and Will Leona, the town's land steward and ranger, out and about removing trees that are blocking trails, mowing fields and trails, and performing other land management activities. And without the support of the town's conservation staff, we wouldn't be able to maintain the beautiful conservation areas and trails that we have. Another initiative, a mobile trail app called Outer Spatial, was launched in 2020, and we continue to work on improving the data and its accuracy and helping more people feel comfortable and knowledgeable on the trails. Outer Spatial has been incredibly useful for us, allowing residents who see downed trees blocking trails to send me an exact location using the app. And we have also had fun creating scavenger hunts and other activities on the trails. Here are some photos from our winter carnival scavenger hunts. And we're always looking for new and creative ways to utilize Outer Spatial to get more people recreating on our trails. I encourage you to check it out and download the app, and we'll post a link to it in the chat. I mentioned our efforts to control invasive species earlier, but simply removing plants is not the most effective method of control. Leaving a bare space just allows it to be colonized again, usually by the same species we just removed. LLCT's Pollinator Action Plan has been an important guiding principle in our land management strategy. By focusing our efforts on planting native species that benefit at-risk pollinators, we are optimizing wildlife habitat and biodiversity and creating a more resilient landscape. Since implementing the plan, we have added hundreds of native pollinator plants to the landscape in Lincoln and distributed over 3,000 plants at our annual plant sales. You can see our trustee Bob Mason helping bring a customer's plants to her car in the top right photo. The top left and middle photos are of our roadside pollinator garden at the Codman Concord Road traffic island, with volunteer Isabel Bailey helping to tend to the garden. We've also planted display gardens at Lincoln Station and the parking lot for the Twin Ponds Stony Brook Conservation Area on Route 117 with the help of volunteers. Our two biggest pollinator projects are at the People for Pollinators Garden behind the school and Chapman Pasture off of Old Winter Street. Chapman Pasture has been the site of a significant restoration effort. And through a U.S. Fish and Wildlife grant, we were able to conduct 2 prescribed burns, have planted over 30 trees and shrubs, and will be seeding it with a native wildflower meadow mix this fall. You can see a picture immediately after the burn on the bottom left, and then some milkweed that sprouted shortly after. The bottom right photo is of Joe and another summer employee planting new trees in the pasture. Our People for Pollinators meadow has also seen some significant improvements over the past 2 years. And now that the school building project is finished and the trail has reopened from the school parking lot, it's a great time to check it out. We have added many plants to the meadow, both inside and around the fenced area. And with the help of LLCT and Conservation Department staff, as well as Michelle Barnes, Myra Ferguson, and Norm Levy, we built a lovely pavilion that not only will provide a space for educational programs, like the one pictured in the bottom left with a Girl Scout troop, but also has gutters that are feeding into 4 rain barrels. We installed solar panels and a pump to make watering these new plants easier and more efficient. We have many ways for volunteers to get involved, which Bryn will cover when she speaks. But if you're at all interested in volunteering to help with trail maintenance, boardwalk building, invasive plant identification and removal, or native plantings and their maintenance, I encourage you to email us and we would love to have your help. I would like to thank the Stewardship Committee, a subcommittee of LLCT's Board of Directors, for their commitment and guidance in our land management efforts, especially Buzz Constable for his enthusiasm and encyclopedic knowledge of the land in Lincoln. In addition, I'd like to personally thank Jane Layton for showing me the ropes. I've never met anyone with as much energy and grit as she has. And as Jeff already mentioned, her work ethic makes everyone else's pale in comparison. I will really miss working with her, and I know that while I might be losing her as a coworker, I'll still have her as a friend and tireless wall lettuce eradicator. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Sarah. Those are great updates from the stewardship team. You guys have been working hard all summer. I just want to share a couple of highlights about our educational programming from the last few years. It's been packed with activities, and even as the pandemic has lingered on, we've continued to offer virtual programming and land and trail-based activities. In the spring of 2021, LLCT collaborated with 5 other local organizations, Farrington Nature Link, Mass Audubon, the Walden Woods Project, the Food Project, and DeCordova Sculpture Park and Museum to host a lecture series called On Belonging in Outdoor Spaces, with the intention of sparking conversation about access and inclusion in nature. In particular, the series sought to highlight the stories and experiences of people of color. This series continued into the fall of 2021 and spring of 2022, and we hope to offer another program in 2023. For several winters now, LLCT has offered evening programs via Zoom on a variety of topics ranging from vernal pools to owls to nature photography. And we're so grateful to community members who volunteer to share their passion and expertise with us. You can see down in the bottom right there, a new collaboration that we kicked off in 2022, a series of workshops and a film screening focused on soil health and carbon sequestration. This was a collaboration with Mothers Out Front, also calling themselves Lincoln Common Ground, and Codman Community Farms. And we are pleased to offer this series of family-friendly workshops all about the importance of dirt. This collaboration has continued into this fall, and we just offered a seed saving workshop this past weekend and are hosting eco gardening tours over the next few weeks. Another incredible and important collaboration, as Sarah mentioned, is with the Town Conservation Department. With the resurrection of conservation coffees, we've now been co-hosting a monthly update via Zoom for members of the community. Additionally, we worked hard with Town Conservation to offer more trail blocks and programming, such as our Earth Day cleanup this past April. In the spring, summer, and fall, LLCT offers birding walks and noticing walks, and it's always a pleasure to be back out on the trails with new and familiar faces. You can see here on the top left, that was a bumblebee ID workshop under the new pavilion at the meadow. So it's already seeing lots of great programming. LLCT also tries to offer a live animal program to the community on a regular basis. Not only is this an amazing way to engage young families, it's a wonderful opportunity for everyone to gain a greater appreciation for wildlife. This June, LLCT hosted a live snake program at the schools, which was open to the public and to the LEAP school after school attendees. We also had some help from the local Girl Scout troop with setting up the room. It was a bit on the wild side, but we hear the kids are still talking about it. And for those of you that are on the call tonight, and you're in luck and you get a little teaser about an upcoming program, we've invited Doug Tallamy, author of Bringing Nature Home, to give a Zoom program in early December about backyard biodiversity and climate change. So stay tuned for more on that. As Jeff mentioned, we are coming up on another year of the calendar. The 2023 calendar is coming soon. I am continually grateful to the talented photographers who capture beautiful landscapes and wildlife pictures of Lincoln and have the generosity to share them with us for the calendar. It's a wonderful publication and we're excited. The calendar is at the printers as we speak, and we should be having it in just a couple of weeks. I do want to say that the annual report from 2021 is published and available online on our website, lincolnconservation.org. Reading through is a great way to stay updated on all of the Land Trust activities, and we also have hard copies available in our office. And lastly, I just want to give a quick shout out to Gwyn Loud and her wildlife column and share a few more great photos. Each month, she writes a wonderful piece about what we are seeing and hearing in Lincoln, keeping readers in tune with the rhythm of the changing seasons. Thank you, Gwen, and to those who submit observations and photos to her column. She's always looking for more. So send her an email anytime you see something cool or snap a photo of something in your backyard. And you can get the column by subscribing to LLCT's e-newsletter. And the column is also published in the Concord Journal, on our website, and at several other local news outlets. So I would now like to welcome Avalon Owens, our keynote speaker this evening. Following a fascinating program on light pollution this past January, LLCT was surprised to discover that Lincoln does not have as dark skies as we expected. In the last 10 years, as you can see by this graph on the bottom of the screen, light pollution has increased substantially throughout town. This awakening has sparked our desire to learn more, which led us to give Avalon a call so that we can better understand how light pollution is impacting Lincoln's fireflies. If you'd like to get involved and help work on solutions to this problem, please reach out to us after the meeting. Avalon Owens received her PhD in biology this past spring from Tufts University. She worked closely with Sarah Lewis on firefly research and is a frequent visitor to Lincoln's conservation fields, where she collects data. This fall, she is turning her attention once more to light pollution at the Rowland Institute of Science at Harvard University. And she also had a recent article in the New York Times talking about fireflies and featuring some local photographs. So we'll link to that during her program. After she speaks, we'll have time for questions. During her presentation, you can type questions into the chat, and then after she's done, we'll allow people to unmute and raise their hand and ask questions. So Avalon, we are so glad that you could join us this evening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn the mic over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me just try to get this going. Are you seeing the right screen? Yeah?
Yes, looks
Great.
great.
Okay. Well, wow. I've just had such a nice time this last half hour listening to everything that you all do, and I'm so honored that you've invited me to talk. I'm so glad that this group exists, and I'm so happy to know that, you know, all my visiting to Lincoln, it looks so nice, and it is so nice because people really are taking care of it, and that's just really wonderful. And so I'm here today to talk about the firefly perspective on things, and specifically how to be a firefly steward. And so I want to start by sharing my first fun fact, which is that unlike a lot of insects like monarchs or bumblebees or honeybees, fireflies don't travel very far. Their entire life they spend in about the area of somebody's backyard. And so the things that you do to take care of the fireflies in your backyard or in the park down the street or wherever, they pay dividends, and you can go back year after year, and the fireflies that you take care of will still be there generations after generations, flourishing because of what you've done. And I think that's really encouraging and really beautiful. So this photo was taken in Concord, sorry. So I kind of split my research between Lincoln and Concord. This one was in the Estabrook Woods, but we'll see some Lincoln spots in a little bit. Speaking of news articles, this piece just came out in Scientific American on Friday. And it's all about how we're finally realizing that light pollution is not just a sort of issue for people who like to see the stars, but it's an ecological problem. And it's got a great photo as at the start of the article. This is of San Francisco. And I think this photo it's really striking, right? But it's also kind of misleading, because I think that a lot of people tend to think light pollution is a San Francisco problem. It's a Boston problem. It's a New York City problem. And certainly light pollution is really bad in really urban areas, but it spreads out from those areas all across the US and other places in the world. And so this map shows what we call sky glow, which is just a fancy word for how this light moves through the air. And everything that is in gray or black is naturally dark or a pristine night sky. And so you can see nearly 50% of the US and 23% of the Earth is unnaturally bright at night. And actually, it's just getting worse over time. The skies have gotten nearly 50% brighter in just the past quarter century. But even these sort of maps, which I think really scare people, they don't fully represent the situation on the ground. So I'm going to show you a kind of choppy video. This was taken in Lincoln. So here we have a firefly habitat, and hopefully you'll be able to see the fireflies are sort of sparkling here and there. And in the background, you know, some people are having dinner, right? And they probably have no idea that this is going on outside their windows. But the fireflies definitely know what's going on inside that house, because lights like this, they change the whole habitat. And these kind of lights, they're never going to show up in a satellite image, right? But they're still really impactful. So this video was taken in Smith Andover. So this is one of my favorite firefly spots. There's this little marshy area right here where you see tons and tons of fireflies early in the summer too. It's the earliest spot I know of. So even in late May, you can go here where there's like a little wooden bridge and you can see tons of fireflies. And the video was taken, I believe it was facing towards one of these houses, but not to shame these people too much, because actually the real offender is one of these houses, because they have a tree in their backyard that's all lit up with string lights and it's on all night. And when you get out there, it's like, oh, how pretty. And then, you know, you spend your time, you know, catching fireflies or whatever. And by the end of the evening, you know, 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., it's the only thing you can see. That tree is so, so bright. And it's just decorative, right? So this is, and I don't think, you know, these people aren't out there, you know, trying to do harm either. It's really an education issue. But anyway, speaking of education, here's some fireflies. So each flash captured in a photo like this was produced by actually a male firefly. They look like this. They're beetles. They have this unique ability to emit light from what we call their lantern, which is in their abdomen. And they do that via a chemical reaction, kind of like a glow stick. It's actually a lot like a glow stick. So they have this enzyme, luciferase, which breaks down a substrate called luciferin. And so when you see fireflies in Lincoln or wherever, usually what you're seeing are males flying around, and we call it advertising, doing courtship advertisements. And what they're looking for is something to answer from the ground. So hopefully they will see a response flash from a female of their species. But if they're not lucky, they might get lured in by an imitation flash from a predatory female in another genus entirely who wants to lure him in and eat him. So there's a lot of sort of drama in a firefly's life. And a lot of complexity too. So there's 167 species of firefly in North America. And actually around Lincoln, I usually see 5 or 10 species at a single site. I have some species lists if you guys are curious that I've kind of been compiling. So just email me whenever, I'll let you know. But like on the order of 5 to 10, that's very regular. And, you know, the first time you go out there, it's complete visual chaos. Because each species has its own way of flashing, but when they're all together like that, it can be really, really confusing. So if you start to learn the particular flash patterns of different species, that can help. And that's actually what the fireflies use to tell themselves apart from other species. These characteristic patterns of flashes are species specific. So they might look something like this, where in this species, you have a single flash with a J shape separated by 6 seconds. And in this one, it's triple flash separated by a little bit of a break. And another thing that fireflies do, which is really important, I think, is they actually separate themselves into different times of evening. So some species come out right at sunset or a little bit after, when it's still light enough to see the bodies of the males flying around. And they're active flying around for about 30 minutes, and then they go to bed, and another group of species comes out and begins their displays for about 30 minutes, and then they go to bed. And and those sort of early species we call crepuscular, which is a fancy word for dusk active or active at dusk. And then once all the crepuscular ones have gone to bed, you get a round or even 2 rounds of what we call nocturnal, fully nocturnal fireflies, who don't really start until it's totally dark out. So these are images of 5 different species of firefly. To me, they look really different, but you might not think so. But I think even more than the sort of visual difference, there's a lot of hidden diversity among North American fireflies. There's this diversity of flash behavior, of when they're active, of how they live their lives, and a lot more. And it makes each species really valuable, really interesting, and really worth protecting. So just a little infographic on what we know about fireflies. This is all 167 North American firefly species represented. Each gets a little symbol. 35 of them were discovered or described in 2018, so we don't know much about them. And then the rest recently had their conservation status assessed for inclusion in the IUCN Red List of endangered species. And most of the species are data deficient. We just don't know that much about them. And of the remaining, about a third are of some level of conservation concern, which could mean that we're at risk of losing up to 60% of fireflies. And one of the reasons why might be that our lights are outshining their lights. So physics, the rules of physics tell us that firefly flashes are really visible against darkness, not so visible when it's light out. And honestly, I could end the talk right here, like I've done it. Light is bad for fireflies, but I'll try to add a little bit more nuance, because light pollution doesn't really make a habitat look like this. And even if it did, it's unclear, if fireflies might be able to respond in some way. And so for my PhD thesis, I've tried to sort of fill out this picture. And my thesis has 5 chapters, and at Tufts and for a lot of biology PhDs, each chapter is like a scientific paper. And so all of these they exist, and most of them are open access. But if you're just curious, if you ever want to read any of them, let me know. I can always send you a version. That can be kind of dense though, so hopefully today will be a little bit more fun. But I'm not going to talk about the first chapter or the last chapter, and I'm only barely going to touch on the second chapter because it didn't take place in Lincoln or Concord. And so the second chapter is all about basically sort of the basic question: what does artificial light do to fireflies? But we already knew something when I started my PhD. We kind of knew that if you take a street light or just a flashlight and you shine it in an area where there's a lot of fireflies, they won't flash as much. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more about this. And specifically, I wanted to ask what colors of light had the biggest impact on fireflies, because there's actually a long tradition among firefly researchers. So here's me, here's my advisor, Sarah Lewis. You guys, I think, are familiar with her and some other folks. Firefly researchers have for a long time advocated the use of firefly-friendly light sources when out looking at fireflies. And that means lights that come in a color that fireflies don't see very well or don't react to. But funnily enough, we can't really agree what that color is. And so red is really common, but so is blue. Blue has a long history of being used as firefly-friendly lighting in the US. And also, more recently, amber or orange has become really popular because of all of the sort of dark sky, many people who are into fixing light pollution advocate the use of amber lights. That's all I'll say. I'll touch on it more in a second. And so I wanted to test these 3 colors, blue, amber, and red, on a firefly which has really amazing displays. And this firefly is called Photinus carolinus. Sadly, it's not found in Massachusetts. They gather in really large numbers in forests sort of along the Appalachians, and they flash in synchrony. It's really amazing to see, but doesn't happen in Lincoln. So of course we're not that interested. And so I won't bore you with all of what I did out in Pennsylvania, but I will just show you what I found. So like I said, I tested 3 colors of light, blue, amber, and red, and I put them out where the fireflies were flashing. And I looked to see what color makes them flash the least. And that color was amber by a large margin. So blue and red both seem to be relatively firefly friendly, whereas amber was actually super disruptive, even though, it's a nice dark sky friendly, light pollution friendly type of light. So it's pretty awkward, right? That amber is really bad for fireflies, and it's increasingly popular, not just as an insect friendly light, but as a generally environmentally friendly one. It causes less sky glow. It has less of an impact on circadian rhythms, they say. It's supposed to be really good for baby sea turtles and all these things, but it's not good for fireflies. And what is good news is that, all of these benefits of amber are also true of red light, and red light has less of an impact on firefly displays. So that's why I like red light the most. But the basic takeaway from this chapter is it's certainly the case that when you put lights out, fireflies don't flash as much. Now, the next immediate question you might have is, okay, well, who cares? Or maybe you wouldn't have that question, but as scientists, we have this question. We all like going to see firefly displays, but if we're really concerned about protecting the fireflies themselves, then we need to know, does it matter whether they flash or not? And also, there's a big problem with the kind of experiment I just briefly alluded to, where you just shine lights on a bunch of fireflies. Because if you just count the amount of flashing that you see, you don't know if you're seeing less flashing because the fireflies aren't there, or because they're there and they're not flashing. And these 2 different scenarios actually imply very different things that you should do in terms of conservation. And so I'm in my 3rd chapter, this is a big one. I sort of tried to do a more controlled experiment and really get at the impact of light on firefly courtship as a whole. So the big question of this chapter is, how does artificial light affect firefly courtship? And this is different than the previous chapter, which was about the firefly display, because those of you who are really paying attention at the beginning will know that firefly displays, those things that you see when you're walking around outside, those are all males. Those are all male courtship advertisements. You don't often see the females sitting on the ground that are flashing back. And so the courtship displays of males, they're only half of the whole courtship program, and they're definitely the less important half. So here's a little video I took. This is in Smith Andover, in that little marshy area. And you can see, so this is a male firefly on top of a male firefly on top of a male firefly who is on top of a female firefly. Let's see if I can get it to play. So we actually see this a lot. We call it a triple stack. If you get 3, that's like a lucky one. And so what this is showing, in a very funny way, is that there are way more male fireflies out there than you need. There's an abundance, and what the male fireflies are doing is not all that important for the next generation of fireflies. It's what the female is doing, because the females lay the eggs, and the eggs make the next generation. I think it's really important to look at both male and female behavior when studying this kind of a thing. And so in this chapter, I worked with this beautiful species. This is one of my favorites. These are in Smith Andover field. They're in, I forgot to point out the other field here. Let's go back. Map. Okay. So they're in this area, and they come out really early in the season. They are also really common in this area of this field, which for all the time I've been at Tufts, we've called it Muster Field, and I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it's called something else, but they're all up in here, and they're all over here, and they live in these just the marshiest places you could imagine. Anywhere you wouldn't want to step, that's where they are. And let's see, let me find the slide. So that's why I wear rain boots when I go out in the field. And they are really just amazing little creatures. One thing that's very interesting about them is I said all this before about, you know, fireflies have specific flash patterns, but in this species, they do all sorts of things. So oftentimes they'll do a triple flash or 4 flashes in a row, but then sometimes they'll do 5 flashes or 2 flashes or 1 flash. And that's what the males are doing. And then the females will do random things as well. 2 flashes or 1 flash in response. And so it seems to me that they have there's a lot going on, you know, they have a lot to talk about. So I collected a bunch of pairs of males and females in Lincoln at these various parts, these various areas, and in Concord. And I would take them back to the laboratory for a couple of nights to do a little controlled experiment that goes something like this. So I have these 2 giant boxes, and I would separate one male up top from one female with a transparent barrier. And then because they were separated from each other, they would sort of flash back and forth for up to an hour, while I went and cycled through 5 colors of overhead light. So 5 colors, we got cool white, warm white, blue, amber, and red. And then also there were sort of dark versions of both of them, dimmer versions. And then I would record what the fireflies were doing using a low light camera. And it had a green filter, so it only picked up the fireflies and not the light that I added. So I'm going to show you a video from this experiment, which I think shows what I found really well. So you're going to see the male flashing at top and the female responds on bottom. So let's see if it'll run. Oh, hold on. Okay, so male flashes 3 times and the female responds. She's in the middle of that circle. The male flashes 3 times, the female responds, 1, 2, 3, female responds, and that's all in darkness. And now I turn on a cool white light, which looks green because of the filter. And you can see the male in the middle. He keeps flashing. He's really trying. So he does still like a 1, 2, 3, but the female has gone completely silent, completely dark. So I filmed a lot of these videos with a lot of different colors of light, and went through them and counted flashes and did all sorts of things. And I came up with something that looks kind of like this. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I found, and I'm going to start with on the left. This is going to be what the males were doing in this whole experiment. So when it was just dark, the males flashed about 10 times per minute. And then under any color of light, it fell to about half. So they were at 10 patterns per minute, and then they were about 5. So about half as much, which is pretty similar to what people have found using other methods. And when the lights were much dimmer, you still found about the same effect. It was about half. So the males flashed much less often under all kinds of light. It didn't matter how bright it was, and it didn't really matter what the color was, except that amber seemed to be particularly bad, which is kind of a trend that we'll be coming back to. Okay, and now here's what the females are doing, because as I said, you know, what the males are doing doesn't really matter. The female is the one who decides what's going to happen for the next generation. So in darkness, the females responded whenever the male flashed, the female flashed back about 100% of the time. And then under all 5 colors of light, this rate fell to close to 0%. And it was actually 0% under a bright amber light. And when the lights were dimmed, it was a little bit better, but still it was just so much less, they were so much less interested than they were in darkness. And so that's very concerning, right? Because we've been doing this kind of a thing, going out and looking how light affects male fireflies. And I think we've really underestimated how bad it is for fireflies as a whole. As for why, once again, amber is the worst color of light that you could possibly put in a firefly habitat, I think that has to do with the fact that fireflies are actually red-green colorblind. And so to them, an amber light looks an awful lot like a yellow firefly flash or a yellowish green flash, and the overlap is just too much. So isn't it ironic, right? that amber LEDs are becoming very popular. They're not just insect friendly, right? They're environmentally friendly, but I really don't think so. So to answer this question, how does artificial light affect firefly courtship? Here are all the colors of light in order of how bad they are. We're coming up at 8 p.m. I do have one more chapter, but don't feel like you need to stay if you got to go watch the Survivor season premiere or something else. You can always send me an email if you have questions or that kind of a thing. The last chapter, which is also the one that was recently featured in the New York Times, is all about sort of the final piece of the puzzle, which is what I call mate success, but it's just basically, do they actually reproduce? And so this is the title of the article that came out about a week ago. This photo was taken in Concord, but there are some photos that were taken in Lincoln, especially at Drumlin Farm. I didn't mention that, but that's another favorite spot of mine. The whole point of this this chapter was to get at a very basic question. Well, starting with a slightly less basic question. So my first question was, how does artificial light affect mate attraction? So when I was doing this thing earlier in the lab with the big chambers and stuff, you know, these two fireflies had already kind of been forced to hang out together. They were forced into courtship. They didn't really have any other options. But if you're a firefly in the big wide world, you know, you might have a lot of choices and you might have a lot of ways that you could behave wandering around. And so here's another species that I truly love. This species is called Photinus greeneye, common name the Cape Cod firefly. I learned this recently. And they really enjoy woods. And so there's a small population in the wooded path that leads to Muster Field, or what I call Muster Field. And there's a couple others sprinkled around. There's a lot in Concord as well. And these ones are very easy to recognize because they have a super characteristic flash pattern. I'll try to show you a GIF. So the male's going to start here and the female is here. So the males will always go, let's see. It's thinking. Okay, so the males will always go flash, flash, 2 flashes, and then the female responds. And then the male moves over here and he goes flash, flash, and the female responds. And it's very, very, very precise. All the timing is totally worked out. So the male goes flash, flash, and the female responds. And I've spent so long looking at this very thing that I've gotten a pretty good sense of the timing. And at some point, it became pretty easy for just me to get involved instead. You don't even need a female firefly if you just have some programmable LEDs. And so I programmed 2 LEDs to flash when I hit a single button. And so then I went out in Muster Field and around Concord, and I would look for males flying around doing their advertisement. And whenever I saw a male, I would flash back like a responsive, you know, two very nice females who are both really into him. And the only difference between them is that one of them was lit up a little bit with an overhead light to about 5 lux, which is pretty dim. You'd have to be pretty far from a street light for it to be 5 lux, is what I'll say about that. And so we would have these females flashing at the males, and then whenever a male approached, we would net him, record which female he chose, and then mark him with fluorescent powder so that if he ever came by again, we wouldn't count him twice. So I'm going to show you what the outcome of that experiment looks like. So this is going to be a hold on. So this, I'm going to plot them on this graph according to which female they chose. So if they didn't care who was who, you would expect about half of this to be black, representing the dark treatment, and about half of it to be purple. But instead, what we found is that 28 out of 29 males approached the dark female. So that's about 96%, which is a really, really, really strong preference for the female that's not lit up. And so if you put yourself in the perspective of that female, let's assume that she's real, right? That one of them's under light and one of them isn't. Females that are under light pollution, under a street light, near a street light, they could have a much harder time finding any mates at all, which is really bad, And so as to how artificial light affects mate attraction, it does seem like normally, a female can attract, as many males as she wants. There's tons of them. And so she doesn't have any problems. But if she's illuminated, all of a sudden, the males aren't that interested. And that seems like a problem. Now, my final question for today is, what if you don't get a choice? What if the males don't get to choose? What if all of the females are illuminated by light pollution? And I'm interested in that. And I'm also interested in sort of the more fundamental question, which is not just how does firefly A get to firefly B, but do they actually mate and, fertilize eggs and lay eggs and that kind of a thing. And so to answer this question, I returned to my favorite species, Botanus obscurellus, and I did a couple of experiments using pairs collected from the field, which we then returned to the field, I should mention. We always put them back afterwards. We just borrow them for a little bit. So I borrowed them, I moved them to my house. This experiment took place during quarantine. I had a screen window in an enclosed back porch, and I set up these 2 containers, and they're cardboard boxes, and each box has this little contraption in the middle, which just holds 1 male and 1 female firefly, and they wander around in here. And then on the other side of the box, there's a camera, an infrared camera that takes 1 photo of them every minute. And so on some evenings, both sets of fireflies experienced natural twilight from the window, a naturally dark night. On other evenings, I put a lamp on overhead, illuminated to either 3 lux, which is again pretty dim, or 30 lux, which is getting to like pretty close to a street light levels of artificial light. So the photos that the cameras took look like this. This was taken in darkness, but you can see the reflection of the infrared lights from the camera. And this is a female. She's sitting against the wall, and this male is going to wander around for a little bit looking for her. And then he finds her pretty quickly and enters what's called stage 1 of mating, which is sort of like the final part of courtship. And then stage 2 of mating, you probably have seen beetles doing this a lot, the naturalists among you. This is sort of a long mating stage. It lasts about 30 minutes, and it's used to, it's interesting. I'll just say that. It takes a while for them to mate fully. So while this was going on, and I was seeing, did the fireflies mate? Did they not? I also went out in the field. This all took place in Smith Andover, actually. And I looked around in that marshy area for a female of the same species who was flashing back and forth with at least 1 nearby male. And when I found one, I'd wait for the male to get pretty close. And then I would either turn on a light overhead, or I'd pretend to turn one on and kind of disrupt them in the same way. And then I would sit there and take notes on what they were doing. And I would watch them until the female mated with the male, or all of the nearby males flew away, or 15 minutes passed because I had to go to bed. And so this is like a field version of what I was doing in my house. And so the side-by-side comparison is kind of interesting, I think. So in my house, in darkness, the fireflies, the male and female pairs that I put together, they mated about 50% of the time. And outside, they mated about 66% of the time. It's a little bit more, which makes sense because, these pairs in the lab, they didn't even know each other. They just got stuck together in a box. Whereas, these ones have, they had a little bit of time. It's a little bit more natural. Anyway, in the lab, under a little bit of light, there was no effect on what they were doing. They still mated at about the same rate. But under 30 lux of light, just a little bit brighter, we saw something very strange, which is that they just completely lost interest in mating, totally. So the female would just sit there. Sometimes the male, you could see in the photos, he would walk over to her. He would even walk over her, like as if she was just in his way, and sort of keep on walking. And so there was a real big impact on mating. And similar, under less light in the field, we did see sort of a similar type of a thing. And I think what's going on here is not that the lights make it hard for them to see each other or hard for them to find each other because they've already found each other. They're already really close. All they have to do at this point is mate. But I think what's happening is they just think, oh, the sun's come up. Well, I don't usually mate during the day. How gauche. And so they sort of sit there and wait for it to get dark. And that's why I think one of the titles of the New York Times piece is "Some Fireflies Wait for a Night That Never Comes." I think for a lot of animals, this is a big impact of light pollution. They're used to being active at night. Well, what the heck? It's not night anymore. So what do? They wait and they wait and they wait, and population collapse. So I'm going to wrap up, but by saying there's a lot of things. It's hard to be a firefly these days. There are a lot of threats that they face, including habitat loss. That's a big one. And pesticide use is also a big one. A lot of people put things on their lawns to kill beetles, root boring beetles. Fireflies are beetles, so it's not great. But this recent survey of experts ranked light pollution as the second most serious threat worldwide and the third most serious threat in North America. I didn't participate in the survey because I was an author on the paper, but I think this is about right. I think light pollution should definitely be recognized as a prominent threat to fireflies. I also think there's a little bit of nuance, and certain fireflies are more vulnerable than others. So fireflies that come out later in the evening when it's totally dark, they're used to it being totally dark. And so I think it's very difficult for them to deal with light pollution. Whereas fireflies that come out earlier in the evening often, manage to find mates when it's pretty light out. And so they might even benefit from light pollution to some extent. And so I also think this may already be happening in a lot of urban places around Boston. I see a lot of crepuscular fireflies and not a lot of nocturnal fireflies. So this is a way in which light pollution could sort of restructure firefly communities, and we could lose a lot of species without even noticing, because you still see some fireflies, right? So that's a little depressing. And light pollution can be depressing. I've studied it for a long time. It's scary. It's also really wasteful. So it's frustrating in that sense. And the fact that it keeps getting worse is also, it doesn't feel good. And the fact that we keep finding new ways in which it, harms really fundamental parts of our ecosystem. Okay, not great. But I also think it's a really inspiring and sort of motivating field to be in, because light pollution is a very simple problem to solve. It's cheap, easy, and really quick to eliminate. You just have to turn off a switch, and it leaves behind zero residual effects, unlike climate change or pesticide use or all those things. And so because of that, and because of how receptive people tend to be to education and just learning that this is a thing, I'm optimistic that light pollution is a problem that will be solved within my lifetime. And so as part of that effort, I've partnered with the Xerces Society of Invertebrate Conservation to write a set of firefly-friendly lighting guidelines. So I'm going to copy this link. I'll put it in the chat as soon as I close my browser. But these are really, really simple things that you can do. I honestly should have put a copy of these in the mailbox of those houses near Smith Andover Field. Instead, every time I just go out there and I think, oh, that tree, it's just so bad. But actually, they're easy things that you can do, really simple. And I think most people are open to this kind of a change. They just don't even realize that it's a thing. And so with that, I want to thank a whole bunch of people, so my PhD committee and a whole bunch of collaborators and funders and friends and research assistants who made this work possible. And I am really happy to answer any questions. I'm going to stop share so I can put that link in the chat.
Oh, thank you, Avalon. That was fabulous. I learned all these things that I didn't even know I didn't know, which is always the best kind of program. And if you send us a copy of this flyer, because we can also send them around afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
I hope the person who's, well, I don't know, maybe it would be good if that person whose tree it was on the call tonight, and
I'm sure they're very
left
nice.
early to go turn it off.
And it's just that thing, it's just what it is.
Well, you know, I'm sitting here in a beautiful sunroom with no covering on the windows thinking, oh, I should get some shades.
Yes, so Isabel Bailey points out pulling window shades is very important. It's one of those things that like my mom always told me to do, like close the curtains at night. You're like, yeah, mom, you know, and I'm like in my own house and it's actually kind of hard to remember, but it makes such a difference. And you're not looking out the window at night anyway. It makes such a difference. And it's pretty easy. And I think somebody needs to invent like automatically closing curtains, but in the meantime, it's good to remember to do.
I think they're probably available, but for a price.
Yeah,
I would expect. So Patricia has a great question. Are fireflies around in the winter? Do our holiday lights impact them?
Great. Yes. So the Christmas tree lights are up in the summer. the string lights around the tree, which is why I have such a problem with them. Let me pull up a picture of the firefly life cycle because I didn't have time to include it, but it's pretty cool. So here we are. So all fireflies start as beautiful little eggs laid on moss, and they're laid on moss in late summer, let's say. And then they hatch into just adorable little larvae. So just like butterflies are caterpillars when they're younger, fireflies are larvae when they're younger. And they run around and they actually they're fierce predators. You might not think that, but they are very carnivorous. They eat earthworms and slugs and snails and that kind of thing. And they eat and they grow and they eat and they grow and they eat and they grow and they get really big. And that whole process takes at least a year, often 2 years around here because it's so cold. And so in the winters, the way that fireflies exist, they're there, but they're in the soil and they look like this. And so Christmas lights or holiday lighting is not, I think, the biggest issue facing fireflies because they're not really above ground at that time. And honestly, not that much stuff is out in the winter. So I don't think taking down holiday lights is like my top priority action item. So we don't have to feel too bad about that. But, maybe if that's the only thing you have left to change, I don't know. I can't necessarily say I support it as a light pollution scientist, but I don't think it's that bad. And so, yeah, so they're living in the soil and eating and growing, and then they only come out, they pupate, which looks like this. So you may have seen a butterfly chrysalis before. This is the firefly version. It's bright pink, which is kind of fun. And then they come out as adults. That's what a really fresh adult looks like. So the wings are still kind of white. They get black after like an hour or so. And the adults are only out, like each individual adult male or adult female is out for about 2 weeks. And an entire species has an adult, what we call the courtship season, lasts maybe 3 weeks to a month. And so it's very, very brief. It's like fireworks, brief, but beautiful. And the other thing that is kind of interesting to know is that most fireflies don't eat at all during this stage. So they don't live that long. One reason is because they're not eating. All that they're doing is sleeping during the day and then coming out at night trying to find a mate to lay eggs.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think it highlights too what you said, Avalon, about how you can actually have a pretty big impact in your backyard if you are making these changes, particularly in a certain part of the year, right when they're most active.
Yeah, so I think, summer is a great time to be really careful about everything that you're doing because so much stuff is out. I see Norman posted some information about the winter firefly, which is amazing. So this is kind of a secret firefly. These ones are out in the winter, starting in, I want to say you start seeing them in like March, but I'm sure they're probably out for longer. And they live on trees, and so they look like adult fireflies, like adult beetles, and they live on tree bark. And so if you wander around in the early spring looking at trees, you'll find them. They are fireflies, but they don't flash or glow or do anything like that. So they're, some might say they're just beetles, but technically they're fireflies. And so we love them, and they do glow as larvae, which is really cool. And so the ways in which light impacts fireflies in terms of making it difficult for them to be active at night, well, that doesn't actually hold up either, because these ones are active during the day, not during the night. So it's a bit more it's a bit of a more complicated story, but there are winter fireflies technically.
That's cool. We had a question from Gwen, and then I'll let people unmute. And if we have any further questions, you can raise your hand and ask. So Gwen was wondering if females are bothered by the light, do they ever move towards darker areas to try and avoid that? Do they realize that that's interfering with their mating?
Such a great question, and it's such a great question, and it's such a good excuse to show you guys some more slides, so forgive me. So I did another big experiment on 2 other species. This one is not found around here, but it's actually the most common firefly in the US. It's called the Big Dipper, but we don't have them in Massachusetts. We do have this one. This is Photinus marginalis. This one is kind of our only late season firefly. So most fireflies around Lincoln and Concord are out in late May to very early July. And then for the whole rest of July and into August, we just have one species, Photinus marginalis. I love these guys. So they're really, really itty bitty tiny, and they have these beautiful sort of whitish wing coverings, and they're called little ghosts, which I just think is so cute. But both of these species, they come out really early in the evening, so you can still see their bodies floating around. And they really like these like managed habitats, so mown lawns and sort of the edges of fields and that kind of thing. And so I did a little experiment looking at a particular population which had both of these species, and it was in this very beautiful part of Pennsylvania. It's Pennsylvania. It's like a beautiful field full of fireflies, and it's like a really nice place for them to live, except for these 3 security lights on this building, which are on all night, every night, and they look like this. And so I did like a really long survey, specifically on female fireflies, looking at, do the females mind and where do they go? And so I collected, I mean, it's not just me, I should say, you know, there's always a lot of people, research assistants working alongside. But we collected a whole bunch of female fireflies. And this is actually where we found them, which was a bit of a surprise, because you would see the males all throughout the field, but the females kind of hung out around the edges. I think that's sort of typical female firefly behavior, which a little fun fact for you, they kind of like the edges a lot. So that's where I found them. And then I would take them and I would mark them with different colors of powder and gel pens, and then release them at one of these 14 spots. And so some of them I put right in front of the big lights. I was like, here you go. And then some of them, it's a little bit further away. And then some of them were just in darkness. And so my thinking was, well, this light probably really bothers them. And so maybe the ones that I release here, if I go back and look for them, they'll start moving away. And so I went back to these spots and I kept looking for the females, seeing how they would move. So here's one that I found, because I had found, well, first of all, because they're fluorescent, they show up really easy under a UV flashlight, which is how I could do this. So I found this female early in the evening and I put down a flag. And then when I came back, she'd climbed up the flag and she'd found a nice mate. And so she was having a great time and she was mating right in front of the lights. So she did not care at all. Actually, it turned out the whole premise of this study was, oh, the females don't like the lights, so we can watch them as they move away. Well, it turned out, spoiler, the females didn't care about the lights at all in these 2 species. So both of them mated at the exact same rate, either in darkness or under light. And I think it's because kind of the stuff I alluded to before, both of these come out really early in the evening, and so they're kind of used to it. They're really resilient. They don't seem to mind. So the short answer is, the ones that I've looked at don't move away from lights, but maybe we shouldn't expect that they would, given that those species aren't as bothered. Another really interesting finding, which maybe I have a graph. Well, I'll just tell you with my words. Is that the females really don't move very far at all. So we would release some at a spot, come back the next evening, and they'd be about this far away. And then you come back the next evening and they're like this far away. And so they don't fly. They can fly, but they don't. I think especially early in the season, they're too heavy. They have all these eggs. And so they just kind of walk, and they don't walk very far. So they're not doing a lot of like choosing where to go based on how they feel about the environment. And I think that's one reason why firefly populations tend to stay in the same spot. But it also makes them more vulnerable to light if they're not as able to move away from it. So that's a very long answer to that question. And more research is needed to fully answer it, I guess.
No, that was great. Last call for any questions. Got a good one from Michelle.
Oh yeah, I'm reading it now. Here, I'll read it aloud. So I'm really glad you brought this up. So as you can tell, I got very interested in different colors of light and, you know, red versus blue versus amber and all this. But I think it's very dangerous to think this way, actually, because, you know, my thinking is, oh, well, you know, we have to assume that somebody's done everything else on the list of things to make, so I'll pull up the list again. Hold on. You know, the firefly friendly lighting guidelines. We assume, you know, somebody has gone through step by step, and they started by turning off lights they didn't need, and then they got all the way to the bottom, and then it's about turning them red. We assume it's like the last thing you do. But a lot of people they just see this and they're like, oh, you know, how fun, right? I can get firefly friendly lights, and then I can light as much as I want because the fireflies can't see them. But that's not really how it works. It's all, you know, the fireflies can't really see them, but a lot of other things can. You know, less things see red than see most other colors. Very few animals have very good red vision. We're actually kind of unique in that respect, but we're not totally unique. Like a lot of birds see red. And so it's not like you're going to find the magic color that only humans can see. It's just not that, the world's not that nice. So while I do think red is, of all the colors, the best, it's not like, so some people, they go all out. So this is like a bat reserve in the Netherlands where they've got the red street lights and stuff like that. That's like bottom of the list. You have to start with curtains, you know, really curtains, turning out lights that you're not using. I mean, all this stuff that just reduces the total amount of light before we start finding a kind of light that's maybe okay. So really good thing to point out.
Thank you. That was a really great way to end our evening, with a reminder that there's, and it's great. This seems like there's some really simple, easy steps to take. And I hope we all go out and get curtains tomorrow. I think I might do that. So thank you, Avalon, for a fabulous evening. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope you learned a lot and enjoyed it. We'll share the recording the next few days.
Wonderful.
Great
Thank you so
evening.
much. It's been so great.